Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. The autumn rain pelted against the master bedroom's window, creating a rhythmic backdrop to Detective Thomas Reeves' mounting unease. He stood in the doorway of their walk-in closet, his weathered hands tucked into the pockets of his department-issued slacks, watching his wife prepare for another evening out. Tori's face, as she applied her signature red lipstick with practiced precision. 20 years with Boston PD and a decade in Special Forces had taught Thomas to trust his instincts. Those same instincts now churned his stomach as he observed the subtle changes in his wife's behavior over the past few months. Victoria Tori Reeves had always been ambitious. It was what had drawn him to her in the first place. But lately, there was something different in the way she carried herself, something that set off warning bells in his mind. "Another late meeting, honey?" Thomas asked, his tone carefully neutral. He watched her reflection in the ornate vanity mirror, noting how she didn't quite meet his eyes. Her hands moved with deliberate grace as she adjusted her pearl earrings, his anniversary gift from 3 years ago. "The Morrison development won't close itself," Tori replied, her voice carrying that new edge of dismissiveness that had become all too familiar. She reached for her Chanel No. 5, the scent she'd worn since they first met at that charity gala 15 years ago. "Don't wait up." Thomas's eyes narrowed slightly as she stood, smoothing down her black Valentino dress, one he didn't recognize. The price tag was probably equivalent to a month of his detective's salary. Her wardrobe had undergone a dramatic transformation recently. Designer labels had replaced the already expensive clothes she used to wear. The jewelry had become more ostentatious, the shoes more exotic, the handbags bearing increasingly prestigious names. The board meetings seemed to be running later and later these days, he observed, stepping aside as she brushed past him. That's when he caught it, beneath her signature perfume. A distinctly masculine scent lingered. His jaw clenched imperceptibly, but years of undercover work helped him maintain his composed exterior. "Well, that's what happens when you're handling a $50 million development, Thomas," she said, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors as she made her way down the hallway. The sound echoed through their recently renovated Victorian home in Beacon Hill, another symbol of Tori's rising success in Boston's cutthroat real estate market. Following her downstairs, Thomas noticed how she checked her phone repeatedly, her manicured fingers dancing across the screen with quick, nervous energy. The blue light illuminated her face, highlighting the subtle changes in her makeup routine. Darker eyeshadow, heavier contouring, as if she were preparing for more than just a business meeting. "Will Jack Morrison be there tonight?" Thomas asked casually, referring to the development's primary investor. He leaned against the kitchen island, watching as she gathered her things. Tori paused for a fraction of a second, so brief anyone else might have missed it. "No, he's in Dubai this week. It's mostly the technical team and some of the board members." She wouldn't meet his eyes as she tucked her phone into her new Hermes Birkin bag. "Right?" Thomas nodded, years of interrogation experience telling him there was more to the story. "The charity board members?" "Among others," she replied vaguely, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror one last time. The diamonds at her throat, definitely new, caught the light as she adjusted her collar. Thomas moved to open the front door for her, playing the role of devoted husband. "Drive safely. The rain's getting worse." For a moment, Tori's facade cracked, and something like guilt flickered across her features. She reached up and straightened his tie, an intimate gesture from their earlier years together. "Don't work too hard on that cold case of yours. You need your rest too." The fact that she remembered he was working on a cold case surprised him. Their conversations had become increasingly superficial lately, centered around schedules and social obligations rather than the substance of their daily lives. As she walked to her Mercedes GLS, another recent upgrade, Thomas noticed how she checked her surroundings before getting in, a behavior he'd seen countless times in surveillance subjects who thought they were being watched. Standing in the doorway, he watched until her taillights disappeared into the rainy darkness. The scent of her perfume lingered in the air, but that other scent, woodsy, expensive, masculine, seemed to mock him. Thomas closed the door and walked to his home office, his footsteps heavy with purpose. Settling into his leather chair, he opened his laptop and pulled up the GPS tracking data from Tori's car. a precaution he'd taken 2 weeks ago when his suspicions first crystallized. The blue dot moved through the city, but instead of heading toward the financial district where her office was located, it turned toward the Back Bay area. Thomas pulled out his phone and dialed a familiar number. After 3 rings, a warm, slightly husky female voice answered.
Rodriguez.
Grace, it's Tom. Got time for coffee tomorrow morning? Our usual spot? There was a pause on the line, and he could practically hear his former partner's mind working. Detective Grace Rodriguez hadn't become the head of financial crimes by missing subtle cues. Tom? Everything okay? Just need your expertise on something, he replied, his eyes still fixed on the moving on his screen. And your discretion. Dorchester Diner, 7 a.m.? Grace suggested, concern evident in her voice. I'll grab our usual booth. Thanks, Grace. I'll bring the case files. He ended the call and leaned back in his chair, his mind already processing the patterns he'd observed over the past months. The late meetings, the sudden influx of expensive goods, the changing behaviors, and now this mysterious masculine scent. Thomas reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small notebook where he'd been documenting his observations. The detective in him knew he needed evidence, not just suspicions. The husband in him hoped he was wrong. But 20 years of police work and a decade in special forces had taught him one invaluable lesson: trust your gut. Opening a new page, he began writing, his pen moving quickly across the paper as he detailed the events of the evening. Outside, the rain continued to fall, and somewhere in the city, his wife was heading to a meeting that he was increasingly certain had nothing to do with charity or real estate development. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 9, its deep chimes echoing through the empty house. Thomas closed his notebook and walked to the window, watching the rain create patterns on the glass. In his mind, he was already planning his next moves, drawing on years of experience in surveillance and investigation. If Tori was involved in something beyond their marriage, he would find out. And if his instincts were right, as they usually were, this was about more than just a possible affair. He pulled out his phone again and scrolled through his contacts until he found another familiar name. After everything he'd seen in his career, Thomas knew that sometimes the biggest dangers came not from obvious threats, but from the subtle erosion of trust in the places you least expected it. Tomorrow's coffee with Grace would be just the beginning. The real investigation was about to start. The Dorchester Diner hadn't changed in the 15 years Thomas had been coming here. The same cracked vinyl booths, the same coffee-stained menus, and the same morning rush of cops and construction workers looking for a decent breakfast before their shifts. The familiar smell of coffee and bacon grease provided an odd comfort as Thomas slid into his usual booth, opposite Grace Rodriguez. Grace looked exactly as he remembered from their days working homicide together. Sharp dark eyes that missed nothing, hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, and an expression that balanced professional concern with personal warmth. She had already ordered their usual, black coffee for him, café con leche for her, and a plate of hash browns to share. "You look like hell, Tom," she said without preamble, sliding his coffee across the table, the morning light filtering through the rain-streaked windows under his eyes, highlighting the sleepless night he'd spent poring over financial records and GPS data. Thomas wrapped his hands around the warm mug, feeling the weight of what he was about to do. "Thanks for meeting me, Grace. This isn't exactly official business. I figured as much when you called last night," she replied, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "You've got that look you used to get during undercover ops, like you're carrying something heavy." He pulled out a manila folder from his briefcase and placed it on the table between them, but didn't open it immediately. "You sure you want to pull this thread, Tom?" Grace asked, her dark eyes concerned. Sometimes ignorance really is bliss. The waitress approached their table, Betty, who'd been serving them for years. She didn't even need to ask for their order. 2 Denver omelets, extra cheese for the detective, extra peppers for the lady? Thomas nodded, managing a small smile. "Thanks, Betty. And maybe keep the coffee coming?" After Betty left, Thomas leaned forward, his voice low. "I need to know, Grace. Something bigger is happening here. I can feel it." He opened the folder, revealing carefully organized documents, bank statements, property records, and surveillance photos. Grace's eyes widened slightly as she recognized Tori in some of the images, entering various high-end hotels and restaurants. I've been tracking some unusual patterns, Thomas continued, spreading out the documents. Tori's real estate business has always been successful, but lately, the numbers don't add up. Properties are changing hands at prices that don't make sense for the market. There are shell companies appearing and disappearing within weeks. Grace picked up one of the bank statements, her trained eyes scanning the transactions. These amounts, they're structured to avoid reporting requirements. Multiple transactions just under 10,000, spaced out to look random. She looked up at him sharply. Tom, this has all the hallmarks of money laundering. Keep going, Thomas urged, pushing forward another document. Check out who joined her charity board 3 months ago. Grace's eyes narrowed as she read the name. Alexander Wade? The hedge fund manager? She pulled out her phone and quickly typed something. Wait a minute, my department's been hearing whispers about him. Nothing concrete enough for an investigation, but enough to raise red flags, Thomas finished. He pulled out a series of surveillance photos he'd had taken over the past week. They showed Tori and Wade meeting at various locations. The Four Seasons, the Bristol Lounge, even a discreet wine bar in the South End. Betty returned with their omelets, and they fell silent until she left. Grace studied the photos while absently cutting into her breakfast. Their body language is interesting, she observed. It's intimate, but something feels off. Like they're performing for an audience. Thomas nodded, pushing his own breakfast around his plate. That's what I thought too. Watch this video. He handed her his phone, showing footage of Tori and Wade entering the Mandarin Oriental. See how they keep checking their surroundings. That's not the behavior of people having an affair. That's tradecraft. Grace let out a low whistle. Your wife's gotten herself mixed up in something serious, Tom. These aren't amateur moves. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. Have you considered that she might be under pressure? Coercion? I've considered everything, Thomas replied, his voice tight. But I need proof. That's why I came to you. You've got resources in financial crimes that I can't access without raising flags. Grace was quiet for a moment, sipping her coffee. Finally, she set down her cup with determination. Okay, I'll help, but we need to be smart about this. If Wade is who I think he is, we're dealing with professionals. One wrong move could spook them, or worse. I know the risks, Thomas said, thinking of the masculine scent he detected on Tori's clothes. But I can't just sit back and watch. Not when my instincts are screaming that something's wrong. Grace pulled out her own notebook and began writing. I'll start with Wade's financials. My team's been building a database of suspicious real estate transactions in the area. I'll cross-reference it with your wife's developments. She looked up at him seriously. But Tom, you need to maintain normalcy. If they suspect you're investigating, I know how to play this, Grace, he assured her, though his heart felt heavy. 20 years of undercover work teaches you a few things about keeping up appearances. They spent the next hour going through the documents, Grace making notes and occasionally sending texts to her team. The diner slowly emptied as the morning rush ended, leaving them relatively alone with their cooling coffee and growing concerns. There's one more thing, Thomas said finally, pulling out a last photograph. This was taken yesterday at the St. Regis. The man with Wade. Recognize him? Grace studied the image carefully, her expression darkening. I know this guy. He's connected to some serious players in the international finance world. Tom, if these people are involved... She didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew what happened when high finance mixed with criminal enterprises. Keep digging, Thomas said, gathering the documents back into his folder. But Grace, be careful. Use secure channels only, and watch your back. As they stood to leave, Grace caught his arm. Tom, whatever this is, we'll figure it out. Just don't do anything rash, okay? Thomas managed a grim smile. You know me, Grace. Slow and steady wins the race. Yeah, that's what worries me, she muttered, but squeezed his arm supportively before heading out into the rainy morning. Thomas watched her go, then paid their bill, leaving Betty an extra-large tip. As he stepped out into the dreary Boston weather, his phone buzzed with a text from Tori. Working late again tonight. Don't wait up. He tucked the phone away, his jaw set. The investigation was officially underway, and there was no turning back now. Whatever truth lay at the end of this path, Thomas Reeves was determined to uncover it, no matter the cost. The fluorescent lights of the police precinct parking garage. Thomas made his way to his car, his mind still processing the day's developments. Grace had sent him some preliminary findings about Wade's financial activities, and the picture they painted was increasingly disturbing. The rain that had been falling all day had finally stopped, leaving the concrete floor slick and reflecting the artificial light like a mirror. It was nearly midnight, and the garage was almost empty. Most of the day's shift had gone home hours ago. Thomas's footsteps echoed in the cavernous space as he walked toward his SUV, his briefcase heavy with files he'd been reviewing. The sound of another set of footsteps made him pause, his hand instinctively moving toward his shoulder holster. Detective Reeves? The voice was female, nervous, and coming from behind a concrete pillar. Thomas turned slowly, his body tensed for action. A young woman stepped into the light, mid-20s, professionally dressed but disheveled, as if she'd been waiting for hours. Her hands were visibly trembling. "I'm Bethany Porter," she said, glancing anxiously over her shoulder. "Mr. Wade's assistant. Please, I need to talk to you." Thomas studied her carefully, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the way she kept shifting her weight from foot to foot. "Kind of late for a social call, Miss Porter." "This isn't social," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She reached into her purse, causing Thomas to tense again, but she only withdrew a USB drive. "Mr. Wade isn't who he claims to be. Neither is your wife. They're planning something terrible. I couldn't live with myself if I didn't warn you." Thomas didn't reach for the drive immediately. "Why come to me? Why not go to the FBI or the SEC?" Bethany's laugh was hollow, tinged with hysteria. "You think I haven't tried? Wade has connections everywhere. Files disappear, complaints get buried. Witnesses?" She swallowed hard. "Witnesses have accidents." A car's engine started somewhere in the garage, making Bethany jump. "Please," she thrust the USB drive toward him. "Everything's on here, but be careful how you access it. They monitor everything." Thomas took the drive, noting how Bethany immediately withdrew her hand as if the brief contact had burned her. "How did you get this information?" "I'm his assistant. I see everything, schedule everything, handle all his correspondence. He thinks I'm just another pretty face, too scared or too stupid to understand what I'm seeing. But I've been documenting everything." Bethany's hands were shaking so badly now that she had to clasp them together. "The charity board meetings your wife attends? They're not what you think. The Morrison development isn't just about real estate. There are offshore accounts, shell companies, people who show up for one meeting and disappear forever." Another sound echoed through the garage, and Bethany nearly jumped out of her skin. Thomas reached out to steady her, but she flinched away from his touch. "Miss Porter," Thomas said quietly, using the same calm tone he'd employed countless times with frightened witnesses, "why don't you come up to the station? We can take your statement, get you some protection." "No." The word echoed off the concrete walls. No police reports, no official statements, nothing that could be traced. She took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. Just look at what's on the drive. But not at home, not at the station. They have ways of monitoring." Thomas slipped the drive into his pocket, his mind already racing through the implications. "How can I contact you if I need more information?" "You can't," Bethany said, already backing away into the shadows. "I've already stayed too long. They'll notice I'm gone." She turned to leave, then paused. "Detective Reeves? Be careful who you trust. Even the people closest to you. Especially the people closest to you." Before Thomas could respond, Bethany disappeared into the darkness of the garage, her footsteps fading quickly. He stood for a moment, the USB drive feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds in his pocket. The garage had grown eerily quiet, with only the distant sound of traffic and the hum of fluorescent lights breaking the silence. Making a quick decision, Thomas walked briskly to his car, scanning his surroundings with heightened awareness. He started the engine but didn't leave immediately, instead pulling out his phone and sending a text to Grace. "Need secure location. Tech support. Off the books." Her response came quickly. My place? 1 hour. Bring coffee. Thomas drove out of the garage, taking a circuitous route home first. He needed to maintain his normal routine in case anyone was watching. The USB drive seemed to burn in his pocket as he navigated the late-night Boston traffic, his mind replaying Bethany's warning about trusting those closest to him. At home, he found Tori's note on the kitchen counter. Gone to bed early. Big presentation tomorrow. The house was quiet, but Thomas moved silently anyway, years of training kicking in. He changed clothes, grabbed his laptop bag, and left a note of his own about following up on a case lead. In their bedroom, Tori was sleeping, or doing a convincing job of pretending to. The faint scent of that masculine cologne still lingered in the air, mixed with her perfume. Thomas stood in the doorway for a moment, watching the rise and fall of her breathing, remembering Bethany's words about trust and betrayal. Back in his car, Thomas pulled out an old burner phone he'd kept from his undercover days. It took him nearly an hour to reach Grace's place, making sure he wasn't being followed. The USB drive felt like a live grenade in his pocket, one that could blow his entire life apart once activated. Grace was waiting for him in her home office, an encrypted laptop already set up. Her face was grim as she took the drive from him. You sure you want to see what's on this? She asked, giving him one last chance to walk away. Whatever it is, there's no going back once we know. Thomas thought about Tori sleeping in their bed, about Bethany's trembling hands, about all the little changes he'd noticed over the past months that had led him to this moment. Do it, he said quietly. Grace nodded and plugged in the drive. As the files began decrypting on her secure system, Thomas pulled up a chair. Whatever secrets this drive held, whatever truth lay behind Bethany's warning, he knew his life would never be the same after tonight. The first file opened on Grace's screen, and Thomas felt his blood run cold. There, in meticulous detail, were plans he never could have imagined. Plans that made all his previous suspicions seem naive by comparison. The downtown office building that housed McKenna Security Solutions reflected the morning sun like a blade, its glass and steel exterior a testament to modern efficiency. Thomas sat in his car across the street, watching people enter and exit through the revolving doors. The USB drive from Bethany felt heavy in his pocket, its contents still sending chills down his spine whenever he thought about them. Colonel James Iron Jim McKenna's office occupied the entire 32nd floor, offering a panoramic view of Boston Harbor. The space spoke of military precision, awards and commendations arranged with geometric accuracy, furniture positioned for optimal tactical advantage, and not a single object out of place. McKenna himself hadn't changed much since their Special Forces days. Still built like a tank, with close-cropped gray hair and eyes that could drill through steel, he rose from behind his desk as Thomas entered. His handshake was firm, but his expression betrayed concern. You look like hell, Tom, McKenna said, gesturing to a chair. When's the last time you slept? Sleep's overrated, Thomas replied, dropping into the leather seat. He pulled out the USB drive and placed it on McKenna's desk. I need your expertise on this, Jim, and your discretion. McKenna's eyebrows rose slightly as he plugged the drive into a standalone laptop, one specifically designed for sensitive material. As he scrolled through the files, his expression darkened progressively. Your wife's gotten herself mixed up with some dangerous people, Tom, McKenna said, his voice grave as he reviewed the documents. He turned the laptop around, showing a dossier with a familiar face. Wade's real name is Anton Petrov. He's ex-FSB, suspected of running a massive money laundering operation. Thomas felt his stomach twist. FSB? Russian intelligence? Former FSB, McKenna corrected, pulling up more files. Went private after the Soviet collapse. Built himself quite an empire in the chaos that followed. He tapped a few keys, bringing up a complex web of financial transactions. These shell companies, the property deals your wife's been involved in, they're all fronts. The Morrison development isn't a real estate project, it's a sophisticated money laundering operation. But why target me? Thomas leaned forward, studying the intricate network of connections on the screen. McKenna's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up more documents. Because you're investigating the Morrison development? Look at these dates. He pointed to a series of transactions. The operation was running smoothly until you started asking questions about some of the property transfers. That's when Petrov decided you needed to be eliminated. Thomas sat back, his mind racing. And Tori? How deep is she in this? That's where it gets interesting. McKenna pulled up another set of files. Your wife's real estate empire? Built on blood money. She just doesn't know it yet. Look at these early transactions from her first major development. The documents showed a complex web of overseas investors and shell companies, all leading back to organizations known to be fronts for criminal enterprises. Petrov's been grooming her for years, McKenna explained, starting with seemingly legitimate investments, gradually pulling her deeper into his operation. Now he's got enough evidence to implicate her in multiple felonies. He's forcing her cooperation. Thomas realized, the pieces falling into place. The murder plot is his way of tying up loose ends. McKenna nodded grimly. Classic FSB tactics. Compromise, control, and eliminate when necessary. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Thomas stood and walked to the window, looking out over the harbor. Ships moved slowly through the morning mist, their paths as carefully choreographed as the conspiracy he was uncovering. I need to get Tori out, he said finally. Whatever she's done, whatever mistakes she's made, she's still my wife. It's not that simple, Tom. McKenna joined him at the window. Petrov's organization is like a cancer. It's spread throughout the entire real estate market. Walking away isn't an option. They'll just find another way to eliminate you both. Thomas turned to face his old commander. Then we take them down. All of them. McKenna smiled, the same wolfish grin Thomas remembered from their combat days. Now that's the Tom Reeves I know. He walked back to his desk and pressed a button on his phone. Sarah, cancel my meetings for the day. And get me everything we have on the Morrison Development security protocols. For the next several hours, they pored over blueprints, security schedules, and financial records. McKenna's resources were impressive: satellite imagery, building schematics, personnel files for every security guard and maintenance worker in Petrov's organization. He's got a weakness, McKenna said, spreading out a map of Boston's financial district. Petrov's paranoid, but he's also arrogant. He thinks his FSB training makes him untouchable. That's why he's still operating in plain sight, hiding behind the Wade persona. We can use that, Thomas mused, studying the map. Make him think his plan is working. Let him get comfortable. McKenna nodded approvingly. Classical counterintelligence. Feed him what he expects to see while we build our case. He pulled up another file. I've got contacts in federal law enforcement who've been trying to nail Petrov for years. They just haven't had enough evidence to move on him. Until now, Thomas said, patting the USB drive. Until now, McKenna agreed. But we need to move carefully. One wrong step, and both you and your wife could disappear into a very deep hole. Thomas checked his phone. Another message from Tori about working late. The masculine cologne, the designer clothes, the late meetings, it all made sense now. She wasn't having an affair. She was being systematically trapped by a professional predator. What's our first move? Thomas asked, his jaw set with determination. McKenna pulled up a detailed organizational chart of Petrov's operation. We start by making him think he's winning. Let him believe his plan is proceeding exactly as he wants. Meanwhile, we gather evidence, build our case, and prepare for the moment when we can bring the whole thing crashing down. As they began planning their counter-operation, Thomas couldn't help but think of Tori, wondering if she was sitting in some luxury hotel right now, thinking she was playing Petrov's game, not realizing she was actually being played herself. One more thing, McKenna said, his voice deadly serious. From this moment on, trust no one outside this room. Petrov's got people everywhere, police, city hall, probably even federal agencies. We keep this completely compartmentalized. Thomas nodded, remembering Bethany's trembling hands as she handed him the USB drive. The young assistant had risked everything to warn him. He wouldn't let her sacrifice be in vain. McKenna stood, walking to a wall safe hidden behind a painting. He removed several burner phones and a set of encrypted flash drives. Welcome to the Shadow War, old friend. Let's go hunting. The next 2 weeks became an elaborate dance of deception. Working with McKenna and Grace, Thomas orchestrated a careful counter-operation, feeding carefully crafted disinformation through various channels. They used Bethany's access to Wade's office to plant subtle hints that the murder plot was proceeding according to plan. Grace had set up a secure operations center in a defunct warehouse on the outskirts of Boston. The space hummed with surveillance equipment and computer monitors, each screen tracking different aspects of Petrov's operation. Our friend made another withdrawal, Grace said, pointing to a financial transaction display. $5 million moved through the Cayman Islands this morning. Thomas studied the data scrolling across the screen. He's getting ready to move. Consolidating his assets. The door opened, and a tall, elegant woman in her 50s entered the room. Madeline Walsh carried herself with the subtle confidence that came from decades of CIA operations. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her eyes missed nothing as she surveyed the room. "Your instincts were right," she said without preamble, dropping a thick file on the conference table. "Petrov's organization is like a hydra. Cut off one head, two more appear. We need to take down the entire network." Thomas picked up the file, scanning its contents. "How deep does it go?" 12 cities, Madeline replied, pulling up a map on the main screen. Red dots appeared across the country, each one with its own compromised real estate developer as a front. "Your wife isn't the first person Petrov's manipulated this way, and she won't be the last unless we stop him." Grace leaned forward, studying the pattern. "It's always the same MO. Find ambitious developers, compromise them, then use their legitimate businesses to launder money?" "With variations," Madeline nodded. "Sometimes it's blackmail, sometimes seduction, sometimes financial manipulation. But the end result is always the same. Respected business people turned into unwitting pawns in his money laundering operation." Thomas felt a familiar ache in his chest as he thought about Tori. "So she's just another victim?" Madeline's expression softened slightly. "Your wife's situation is complicated. Her ambition made her vulnerable to manipulation, yes. But from what we've uncovered, she's not entirely innocent either. She made choices, Tom. Choices that went beyond normal business practices." Before Thomas could respond, one of Grace's analysts burst into the room. "We've got movement. Wade just scheduled an emergency board meeting for the Morrison development." They gathered around the main screen as security camera footage showed people arriving at the development's downtown office. Tori was among them, wearing a new Chanel suit and carrying her ever-present Hermes bag. "Look at her body language," Madeline observed. "She's nervous. See how she keeps adjusting her collar. Classic stress tell." Thomas watched his wife disappear into the building, remembering how she used to fidget with her jewelry when she was worried about something. Some things hadn't changed. "We've got audio," Grace announced, typing commands into her computer. The room filled with the sounds of the board meeting, transmitted through a device they'd managed to plant in the conference room. Wade/Petrov's smooth voice came through clearly. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to announce that all obstacles to our project have been addressed. We can proceed with the final phase." The hidden meaning behind his words made Thomas's skin crawl. They were talking about his planned murder as if it were just another business transaction. "Your wife's staying very quiet," Madeline noted, listening intently. "Usually she's more vocal in these meetings." "She knows what's coming," Thomas said softly. "She's already made her choice." The meeting continued for another hour, with various board members discussing seemingly legitimate business matters. But to the trained observers in the warehouse, every word had a double meaning, every proposal a hidden agenda. After the meeting, they watched Tori and Wade leave together, heading to their usual hotel. But this time, something was different. "Look at Wade's security detail," McKenna pointed out, having joined them during the meeting. "Two new guys. I know those faces, ex-Spetsnaz. He's bringing in his heavy hitters." "They're getting ready to move," Madeline agreed. "The question is, what's our play?" Thomas straightened up, his decision made. "We keep feeding them what they want to see. Make them think their plan is working perfectly. Meanwhile, we gather every piece of evidence we can find." Grace pulled up another screen showing financial transactions. "I've been building RICO predicates. If we can prove the pattern across all 12 cities, we can take down the entire network," Madeline finished. "But we need something concrete to tie it all together." something that proves Wade is Petrov and shows the full scope of the operation. Thomas thought for a moment, then turned to McKenna. Those new security guys, can we get to them? McKenna's wolfish grin returned. Already working on it. One of them has a gambling problem. The other has a brother in Brighton Beach who owes money to the wrong people. Careful, Madeline warned. Push too hard, and Petrov will smell a trap. Then we don't push, Thomas said. We let them come to us. Make them think they're turning us. The room fell silent as they considered the risks. Playing a double game with professionals like Petrov's men was incredibly dangerous. One wrong move, and people would die. There's something else you should know, Madeline said quietly. We've been analyzing Tori's involvement more deeply. She's not just a conspirator or a victim. The pattern suggests she's been actively participating in these schemes for longer than we initially thought. Thomas felt the weight of those words settle on his shoulders. He'd been holding on to hope that his wife was merely a pawn in Petrov's game. But the evidence was becoming harder to ignore. Show me, he said finally. As Madeline pulled up the files, Thomas steeled himself for what he was about to learn about the woman he'd loved for 15 years. Sometimes, he reflected, the hardest truths were the ones closest to home. The parking garage echoed with the sound of footsteps and muffled voices. Thomas moved silently through the shadows, every sense alert for signs of danger. McKenna's intelligence had been clear. This was where Petrov's men would make their move. 3 figures emerged from a black SUV, their movements betraying their military training. Thomas recognized them from the surveillance photos, Petrov's ex-Spetsnaz operators. They carried themselves with the confident swagger of men who were used to being the most dangerous people in any room. What they didn't know was that Thomas had spent a decade in special forces specifically training to counter exactly their type of operation. He watched them sweep the garage, noting their practiced coordination. They were good, but they'd underestimated their target. The first sign that something was wrong came when the garage lights flickered. The 3 men immediately moved into defensive positions, but Thomas had already changed location. Years of combat experience had taught him the value of psychological warfare. Something's not right, one of them muttered in accented English. Split up. Find him. Thomas allowed himself a grim smile. They were playing right into his hands. He'd chosen this garage carefully. He knew every corner, every blind spot, every acoustic quirk. More importantly, he knew exactly how sound carried through the concrete structure. The first operator went down silently, caught in a chokehold that used his own momentum against him. Thomas zip-tied his hands and feet, then moved to his next position. The second man was more cautious, but even his training couldn't prepare him for the years of experience Thomas brought to the fight. The third operator proved the most challenging. He'd realized something was wrong when his companions failed to check in. His weapon was out, and his eyes scanned the shadows professionally. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He was looking for a cop, not a special forces operator. The fight was brief but intense. Thomas took a glancing blow to the ribs, but his counterattack was decisive. As the last operator lay unconscious, Thomas quickly secured him and began searching their phones. What he found made his blood run cold. Text messages, emails, and encrypted communications revealed the full scope of Petrov's operation. But more shocking was his wife's involvement. The messages made it clear. Tori wasn't just a pawn, she was actively participating in the scheme. One message chain particularly stood out. Target's routine confirmed. Wife says pension and insurance policies updated last month. Clean hit means everything transfers to her. She's ready to play grieving widow. Thomas sat back against a concrete pillar, the phone's blue light illuminating his face as he processed what he was reading. All this time, he'd been hoping that Tori was being manipulated, that she was another victim of Petrov's schemes. But the evidence in his hands told a different story. His wife had actively conspired to have him killed, believing Petrov would help her eliminate him and take control of his substantial pension and life insurance. The designer clothes, the late meetings, the gradually changing behavior, it hadn't just been about money laundering. It had been about preparing for his murder. The sound of approaching sirens snapped him back to the present. He quickly photographed the key evidence on the phones, then placed an anonymous call to report suspicious activity in the garage. By the time police arrived, he would be long gone. and Petrov's men would be unable to reveal their true purpose without exposing the entire operation. As he drove away, Thomas's mind was already working on the next phase of their plan. The garage confrontation had given them something crucial, hard evidence linking Petrov's organization to multiple criminal enterprises. But it had also forced him to confront a painful truth about his marriage. His phone buzzed with a text from Grace. Evidence secured. Meeting at safe house in 30. Thomas turned his car toward the safe house, his jaw set with determination. The phones from Petrov's men had provided a goldmine of information, but they would need to act quickly before the organization realized something had gone wrong. The safe house was a nondescript 3-story walk-up in Somerville, chosen specifically because it belonged to none of their usual circles. As Thomas parked 3 blocks away and approached on foot, he ran through standard counter-surveillance measures, ensuring he hadn't been followed. Grace met him at the door, her laptop already open on the kitchen table. McKenna and Madeline were there too, their faces illuminated by multiple screens showing surveillance feeds and data streams. The phones? Grace asked immediately, holding out her hand. Thomas passed them over, along with his own phone containing the photos he'd taken of key messages. It's worse than we thought. Tori's not just involved in the money laundering. She's been actively planning. He couldn't finish the sentence. Show me, Grace said quietly, plugging the phones into her computer. As the data downloaded, her eyes widened. My God, Tom. These messages. McKenna moved to look over her shoulder, his expression darkening as he read. Classic sociopath behavior. She's been playing this role for months, maybe years. The financial transfers align with the timeline, Madeline added, pulling up another screen. Look at these life insurance policy adjustments. She's been setting this up methodically. Thomas paced the small kitchen, his ribs aching from the fight. All this time, I thought Petrov was manipulating her, that she was another victim. But she's been a willing participant from the start. People can surprise you, Madeline said softly. Sometimes the ones closest to us are the ones we know the least. The room fell silent as Grace continued extracting data from the phones. Finally, she looked up. We've got enough here to bring down the whole operation. Financial records, contact lists, operational details across all 12 cities. But if we move too soon, they'll scatter, McKenna finished. We need to keep them thinking their plan is still on track. Thomas stopped pacing and leaned against the counter. They'll be expecting those men to report back. When they don't, we've got maybe 12 hours before they realize something's wrong, McKenna calculated. Less if any of them had check-in protocols. So what's our next move? Grace asked, looking at Thomas. Before he could answer, one of the phones buzzed with an incoming message. They all froze, watching as Grace pulled up the text on her screen. It was from Tori. Is it done? Need confirmation for next phase. Thomas felt like he'd been punched in the gut. The clinical detachment in his wife's words, asking about his murder as if it were just another business transaction, made everything suddenly, brutally real. We can use this, Madeline said, her CIA training kicking in. String them along. Make them think the plan is proceeding. McKenna nodded in agreement. But we need to move fast. Set up the counter-operation before they realize those men aren't coming back. Thomas stared at his wife's message, years of memories flashing through his mind. The woman who'd shared his bed, his home, his life. How long had she been planning his death? How many of their moments together had been real, and how many had been carefully calculated steps in her long game? Tom, Grace's voice was gentle. What do you want to do? He straightened up, pushing aside his personal pain. They had work to do, and lives were at stake. We use their own plan against them. Make them think everything's going exactly as they intended. But this time, we control the narrative. The others nodded, recognizing the shift in his demeanor from husband to operator. This wasn't about his marriage anymore. It was about taking down a criminal enterprise that had destroyed countless lives. McKenna pulled up the building schematics they'd been studying earlier. We've got the tactical advantage now. We know their playbook, their personnel, their protocols, and they still think they're hunting a cop, Madeline added. Not a special forces operator with a team of intelligence professionals backing him. Thomas looked at the message from his wife one last time, then turned to Grace. Send a response. Make them believe. It's time to turn the hunters into the hunted. As Grace began crafting the reply that would set their counter-operation in motion, Thomas moved to the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. Somewhere out there, his wife was waiting to hear that her husband was dead. She would learn soon enough that she'd made a fatal mistake. She'd underestimated the man she'd married. The night stretched ahead of them, full of possibilities and dangers. They had the evidence they needed, the team was in place, and their opponents had no idea their perfect plan was about to become their undoing. All that remained was to spring the trap. The surveillance room hummed with electronic equipment, dozens of monitors casting a pale blue glow across Grace's concentrated face. She adjusted her headset, fine-tuning the audio feed from the penthouse's hidden microphones. Beside her, Thomas sat motionless, watching the screens with an intensity that made the air feel heavy. Camera 3 is live. McKenna's voice crackled through their earpieces. His team had worked through the night, planting surveillance equipment throughout Tori and Petrov's luxury penthouse in the Back Bay. Audio feeds are clean. Thomas leaned forward as the elevator doors opened on one of the screens. Tori stepped out, followed by Petrov, no longer maintaining his Wade persona in the privacy of their sanctuary. The change in his bearing was striking. Gone was the smooth-talking hedge fund manager, replaced by the calculated movements of a trained operative. Everything's proceeding exactly as planned, Petrov was saying, his Russian accent now clearly evident. He shrugged off his tailored jacket, dropping it carelessly across a leather armchair. The police found exactly what we wanted them to find. Grace's team had carefully staged the garage scene after removing Petrov's unconscious men. Selective evidence, planted witness statements, and a carefully crafted narrative all pointed to Thomas Reeves becoming another tragic statistic. A cop who stumbled into something too big and paid the ultimate price. Tori moved to the bar, her hands steady as she poured 2 glasses of champagne. The diamonds at her throat caught the light as she turned, and Thomas recognized them as the anniversary gift he'd given her just last year. The detective at the scene seemed convinced, she said, her voice carrying a note of satisfaction that made Thomas's stomach turn. They're not looking too closely. Just another failed robbery attempt in a parking garage. Petrov accepted the champagne, raising his glass in a mock toast. You should have seen his face, he laughed, the sound echoing through the surveillance speakers. The great detective, brought down by common thugs. The irony is delicious. Thomas watched his wife's reaction, searching for any sign of remorse, any flicker of the woman he'd loved for 15 years. Instead, he saw only cold calculation as she smiled. He never appreciated what I was capable of, Tori replied, her voice arctic. Always treating me like some trophy wife. Now everything he has is mine. She moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out over the Boston skyline. The pension, the insurance payout, the house. All of it transfers automatically. No messy divorce, no drawn-out legal battles. Clean and simple. Grace reached over and squeezed Thomas's arm, offering silent support as they watched the scene unfold. On another screen, they could see McKenna's team taking up positions around the building, waiting for the signal. You've exceeded my expectations, Victoria, Petrov said, moving to join her at the window. When I first approached you about the Morrison development, I wasn't sure you had the constitution for this kind of work. But you've proven to be a natural. Tori's laugh was brittle. The real estate market is a shark tank, Anton. You either learn to swim with predators, or you get eaten. She turned from the window, setting down her glass. Should we practice my performance for tomorrow? The grieving widow needs to be convincing. What followed made Thomas's jaw clench. For the next hour, they watched as his wife rehearsed her role. The devastated spouse learning of her husband's tragic death, the brave face at the funeral, the tearful interviews with investigating officers. Petrov coached her on every detail, from the slight tremor in her voice to the way she should clutch Thomas's photo during press appearances. Remember, Petrov instructed, you're not just playing this for the police. The whole city will be watching. The wife of one of Boston's most decorated officers, gunned down in the line of duty. The media will eat it up. I know how to play my part, Tori replied, dabbing at perfectly dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. I've been playing it for 15 years. The words hit Thomas like physical blows. Each revelation about their shared life being nothing but an elaborate performance stripped away another layer of what he'd thought was real. Movement on the street, Grace reported, switching to external cameras. Black SUVs were pulling up around the building, Petrov's security detail arriving for the night shift. They're rotating guards. Thomas checked his watch. In 6 hours, the story of his death would hit the morning news. Everything they'd worked for hinged on Petrov and Tori believing their plan had succeeded perfectly. Send the confirmation, he instructed Grace. They'd crafted a message that would appear to come from Petrov's men, confirming the successful elimination of Detective Thomas Reeves. Within minutes, they saw Petrov check his phone. His satisfied smile told them the message had its intended effect. It's done, he announced to Tori. The cleanup crew reports no complications. By this time tomorrow, your tragic story will be leading every newscast in New England. Tori raised her glass again, her red lipstick, the same shade she'd worn when they first met, leaving a perfect imprint on the crystal. To new beginnings, she said, and to my dear, departed husband. He should have stuck to simple police work instead of asking so many questions about the Morrison development. Your performance is improving, Petrov approved, but remember to add a slight catch in your voice when you mention him. Grief should color every word. They spent the next few hours watching as Petrov and Tori refined their strategy, discussing everything from press statements to investment plans for Thomas's death benefits. Each casual mention of his death, each calculated plan for profiting from his murder, reinforced the cold reality of his wife's true nature. Finally, around midnight, Petrov left for his own penthouse in the building next door, connected by a private skybridge. Tori remained at the window, staring out at the city lights. For a moment, her mask slipped, and Thomas caught a glimpse of something in her expression. Not remorse, but pure, unfiltered ambition. She wasn't just playing along with Petrov's schemes. She was reveling in them. All units in position, McKenna's voice came through the earpiece. Waiting for your command. Thomas watched his wife pour herself another glass of champagne, practicing her widow's smile in the window's reflection. Tomorrow would bring the final act of this performance, but not the one she was rehearsing for. Let them enjoy their celebration, he said quietly. Tomorrow, we show them what a real performance looks like. Grace nodded, already coordinating with federal agencies for the morning's operation. On the screens, Tori raised her glass to her own reflection, toasting her success while surveillance cameras recorded every moment. The stage was set for the final scene, but only Thomas and his team knew the true ending to this story. Dawn painted the Boston skyline in shades of gold, and Rosa's Grace coordinated with tactical teams across the city. The federal operation had been months in the planning, every detail meticulously arranged. In 12 cities across the country, similar teams were moving into position, preparing for simultaneous raids on Petrov's entire network. Status report, Grace commanded, her voice steady as she monitored multiple communication channels. Updates flowed in from various teams. Team Alpha in position at the penthouse. Team Bravo covering the skybridge. Team Charlie securing the garage exits. Financial team standing by to freeze accounts. McKenna's voice cut through the chatter. Primary target is moving. Petrov just left his penthouse, heading for the skybridge. Thomas watched through the surveillance feeds as Petrov crossed between buildings, his security detail scanning for threats that were already inside their perimeter. The evidence from the hitman's phones had provided them with everything. Security protocols, guard rotations, even the codes to Petrov's private elevator. Target is entering the primary location, McKenna reported. Moving to Phase 2. On the monitors, they watched Petrov enter Tori's penthouse. She was already dressed for her performance. Black designer suit, perfectly applied makeup, red-rimmed eyes achieved with expert application of irritants rather than tears. She was practicing her eulogy in front of a mirror, her voice catching at all the right moments. He was everything to me, she rehearsed, her hand pressed to her heart. A dedicated officer, a loving husband. I still can't believe he's gone. Excellent delivery, Petrov approved, helping himself to morning coffee. The press will love it. Have you prepared your statement about the charity foundation in his memory? Of course. Tori's smile was predatory. Nothing opens checkbooks like a murdered cop's widow starting a foundation. We can move millions through it within months. The casual way they discussed using his death as yet another money laundering vehicle made Thomas's decision even easier. He pressed his radio. All teams execute. The operation unfolded with military precision. Throughout the country, federal agents were raiding offices, seizing computers, and arresting key players in Petrov's organization. Every property, every bank account, every shell company was hit simultaneously. In the penthouse, Tori was adjusting her costume jewelry, chosen to project the right image of grieving dignity, when the first explosion of breaching charges shattered the morning calm. McKenna's team burst in from multiple entry points, their movements precise and coordinated. Federal agents, everyone on the ground. Petrov's reaction was instant, his FSB training kicking in as he reached for a hidden weapon. But McKenna's team had been chosen specifically for this moment. Former Special Forces operators who trained for exactly these scenarios. I wouldn't. McKenna's voice cut through the chaos. Your entire organization is being dismantled as we speak. It's over. Tori's performance finally cracked. Her carefully constructed mask of grief shattered into an expression of pure rage as she recognized the tactical team leader. McKenna? But that means... Yes, Mrs. Reeves, Grace said, striding into the penthouse with her federal badge displayed. Your husband sends his regards. The shock on their faces was profound. Thomas watched through the feeds as realization dawned in Tori's eyes. All her careful planning, her meticulous performance, had been a performance within his own operation. Practicing your lines? Thomas's voice came through the tactical team's speakers. You might want to save them for your prison performance. Petrov made one last desperate move, throwing his coffee mug at the nearest agent and diving for what appeared to be a panic room entrance. But McKenna's team was faster, and they'd already disabled the room's security systems. Clear. Target secured. Secondary target in custody. The reports flowed in as both Petrov and Tori were professionally restrained. Grace read them their rights while federal agents began documenting and seizing evidence. The phones seized from Petrov's hitmen had provided the final pieces needed for RICO charges, creating an airtight case against the entire organization. The Morrison development? Tori asked as agents led her past Grace, her voice hollow. Being seized, along with every other property in Petrov's network, Grace replied. The evidence from your staged murder plan gave us everything we needed. Turns out plotting to kill a police officer creates excellent predicate crimes for RICO charges. Throughout the country, similar scenes were playing out. Grace's secured phone buzzed with updates. Chicago office secured. Principals in custody. Miami location seized. Documents recovered. Seattle team reports full compliance. No casualties. Dallas operation complete. All targets accounted for. McKenna approached the surveillance center where Thomas was monitoring everything. Ready to make your appearance? Thomas stood, straightening his tie. It was time to step out of the shadows and face the woman who'd planned his death. Everything's recorded? Every word. McKenna confirmed. From the celebration of your death to the eulogy practice. The jury's going to love it. As Thomas rode the elevator up to the penthouse where his wife was being held, he reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the first suspicions to this final moment, every step had been a calculated move in an elaborate game of deception and counter-deception. The elevator doors opened, and he stepped out to face the end of his marriage and the beginning of justice. The federal courthouse buzzed with activity as Thomas made his way through the security checkpoints. 6 months had passed since the morning of the raids, and today marked the final phase of the trial. The case had made national headlines, international money laundering ring exposed, corrupt real estate empire falls, detective reveals wife's murder plot. Inside the courtroom, Thomas took his place in the witness box for his final testimony. The evidence had been overwhelming: surveillance footage, financial records, intercepted communications, and the detailed murder plot itself. But the prosecution wanted to end with impact, letting Thomas describe the betrayal in his own words. Detective Reeves, the prosecutor began. Please tell the court about the moment you realized the true nature of your wife's involvement in this conspiracy. Thomas's gaze swept the courtroom, meeting Tori's eyes briefly. She sat at the defense table, designer clothes replaced by prison garb, her makeup-free face showing the strain of 6 months in federal custody. The hardest part wasn't discovering the murder plot, Thomas testified, his voice clear and steady. It was realizing that every moment of our 15-year marriage had been a performance. Each anniversary dinner, each Christmas morning, each quiet Sunday. All of it was just preparation for my eventual elimination. As he spoke, evidence photos appeared on the courtroom screens, surveillance images showing Tori and Petrov celebrating his supposed death, practicing her widow's performance, planning to use his murder as cover for more money laundering. The worst crime here wasn't the money laundering or the murder plot, Thomas continued, echoing words he'd considered carefully. It was the betrayal of trust, not just mine, but that of every honest citizen who believes in the system. When people like Alexander Wade, or should I say Anton Petrov, corrupt legitimate businesses for criminal enterprises, they don't just steal money. They steal faith in our institutions, in our neighbors, in the very fabric of society. The jury seemed captivated as Thomas detailed how the case had revealed that Petrov had orchestrated similar schemes before, always using ambitious, morally flexible partners who eventually took the fall. The pattern was clear: find successful but ethically compromised business people, entangle them in progressively larger crimes, then use them as both accessories and shields. After the testimony, Thomas sat in the courthouse cafeteria with Grace, both of them watching news coverage of the trial on a wall-mounted television. The numbers were staggering: 13 corrupt real estate operations exposed, over $3 billion in illegal assets seized, dozens of conspirators facing lengthy sentences. Hell of a way to end a marriage, Grace commented, sliding him a fresh coffee, their old ritual providing comfort in the chaos. Any regrets? She asked after a moment of silence. Thomas thought about the question as he watched footage of Bethany Porter being escorted into witness protection. She'd been crucial to breaking the case, and her testimony had helped expose similar operations across the country. Now she was getting a fresh start, her courage rewarded with a new chance at life. Only that I didn't see it sooner, he replied finally. But sometimes you have to go through darkness to appreciate the light. The coverage switched to McKenna, whose security firm had received multiple federal contracts after their role in the operation was revealed. He was discussing new measures to prevent similar schemes, his expertise now highly sought after by agencies around the world. Grace herself had been promoted to head of organized crime, her skillful coordination of the multi-city operation earning recognition from the highest levels of law enforcement. She was already using her new position to implement improved methods for detecting and preventing large-scale financial crimes. Outside the courthouse windows, Boston's spring sunshine painted the streets gold, promising new beginnings. Thomas watched people going about their daily lives, unaware of how close they'd come to having their own investments and communities corrupted by Petrov's organization. The verdicts, when they came, were decisive. Tori and Petrov faced multiple life sentences, their elaborate scheme ultimately undone by the very attention to detail that had made it successful for so long. Every practice performance, every calculated move, had been recorded and turned against them. As Thomas left the courthouse that final day, he felt lighter than he had in months. The case had changed him, taught him painful but valuable lessons about trust, perception, and the masks people wear. But it had also shown him the strength of true loyalty, the value of genuine relationships, and the power of justice served not for revenge, but for the greater good. Walking down the courthouse steps, he paused to look back at the building where his old life had officially ended. But endings weren't always what they seemed. Sometimes they were just the first step toward something better. Epilogue. 5 years later. The Federal Correctional Facility in Danbury, Connecticut, bore little resemblance to the luxury penthouses Victoria Reeves had once called home. The harsh fluorescent lights cast unflattering shadows across her face as she sat in the visitation room, her orange jumpsuit a far cry from the designer clothes that once filled her closet. 5 years of incarceration had left their mark. Her once perfect manicure replaced by institutional plainness, her carefully maintained appearance showing the strain of prison life. Across the table sat Dr. Sarachun, the prison psychiatrist conducting interviews for a comprehensive study on white-collar crime and psychological manipulation. The irony wasn't lost on Tori. She'd become a case study in ambition gone wrong. Let's talk about the aftermath, Dr. Chun said, her pen poised over her notebook. Your appeal was denied last month. How are you processing that? Tori's laugh was hollow, echoing off the cinder block walls. 25 to life. No possibility of parole. The same sentence they gave Petrov. She traced patterns on the table's scratched surface. He's in Florence, you know. Supermax. Turns out the money laundering was just the tip of the iceberg. They found connections to everything from arms dealing to human trafficking. And how do you feel about your role in his organization now? I was stupid, Tori admitted. Something she'd never have done 5 years ago. I thought I was using him to get what I wanted. Turned out he'd been playing me from the start. All those early investments in my business, the guidance, the mentoring. It was all carefully planned to draw me in. In another wing of the prison system, Anton Petrov faced his own demons. The former FSB operator's empire had crumbled spectacularly. The federal investigation had uncovered operations in not just 12, but 27 cities across 3 continents. The $3 billion initially seized had grown to nearly $12 billion in recovered assets. Meanwhile, across town in Boston's financial district, Grace Rodriguez's office overlooked the same harbor she'd once watched with Thomas during their investigation. As head of the FBI's newly formed Real Estate and Financial Crimes Task Force, she transformed the lessons from the Petrov case into a revolutionary approach to detecting and preventing similar schemes. Director Rodriguez? Her assistant's voice came through the intercom. Colonel McKenna is here for your meeting. James Iron Jim McKenna entered, his security firm now the FBI's primary contractor for complex financial crime operations. The Petrov case had established him as the go-to expert in detecting and dismantling sophisticated criminal enterprises. Just got back from teaching at Quantico, he said, settling into a chair. Using the Petrov case as a training model. You should see how the cadets' eyes light up when we get to the part about Thomas's counter-operation. Grace smiled, remembering those intense days of surveillance and planning. How is Thomas, by the way? Still in Colorado? Loving it, McKenna confirmed. The private investigation firm is thriving. Turns out a lot of companies want someone who's proven they can spot complex financial fraud from the inside. Thomas Reeves had indeed found his calling in the private sector, his experience with Petrov's operation making him uniquely qualified to protect corporations from similar schemes. His firm, headquartered in Denver, specialized in detecting financial fraud and corporate infiltration. He'd even published a book, Trust But Verify, a detective's guide to corporate fraud, which had become required reading in several FBI training programs. Did you hear about Bethany? Grace asked, pulling up an email on her screen. She finished her MBA at Stanford. Witness protection set her up with a whole new identity, but she's using her experience to help other whistleblowers. She's testifying before Congress next month about strengthening corporate whistleblower protections. Bethany Porter's courage had sparked a movement. Her testimony had inspired other corporate insiders to come forward, leading to the exposure of several similar operations worldwide. The Porter Protocol was now standard procedure for handling corporate whistleblowers in federal investigations. What about the Morrison development? McKenna asked, accepting a coffee from Grace's assistant. Seized and repurposed, Grace replied. The federal government turned it into a regional law enforcement training center. They use it to teach financial crime investigation techniques. Sometimes the best way to fight shadows is to shine a light directly on them. The conversation turned to their current cases, but Grace's mind wandered to the changes the Petrov case had brought to Boston's real estate market. The exposure of the money laundering operation had led to massive reforms in real estate financing and development. New regulations, dubbed the Reeves Rules in a twist of irony, required unprecedented levels of transparency in property transactions. Across the city, in the Dorchester diner where Thomas and Grace had first discussed their suspicions, a framed newspaper article hung on the wall. The headline read, Boston detective uncovers international crime ring. Saves billions. Betty, the waitress who'd served them countless Denver omelets, still pointed it out to customers with pride. In the federal courthouse where the trial had taken place, law students now attended lectures on the case. The Petrov-Reeves trial had become a textbook example of modern RICO prosecution, studied by aspiring lawyers and law enforcement officers alike. Thomas himself rarely returned to Boston. the city holding too many complicated memories. But he'd found peace in the Colorado mountains, where the clear air and honest work helped heal old wounds. He'd even started dating again, carefully, thoughtfully, with a hard-earned wisdom about trust and verification. His last contact with Tori had been during the appeals process, when she'd written him a letter seeking some kind of closure. The letter, like so many things about their marriage, had been a performance, full of carefully crafted remorse that rang hollow against her actions. He'd never responded, choosing instead to let the silence speak for itself. The money they'd seized from Petrov's organization had been used to establish a victims' compensation fund, helping small businesses and individuals who'd been unwittingly drawn into the scheme. Thomas had donated his share of the civil forfeiture awards to create a scholarship for children of law enforcement officers, turning his personal tragedy into something positive. Grace's phone buzzed, another case requiring attention. As she and McKenna reviewed the details, she couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed. The Petrov case had transformed not just their careers, but the entire landscape of financial crime investigation. "You know what Thomas always says," McKenna commented, reading through the new case file. "The biggest frauds happen in plain sight, hidden behind respectability and trust." Speaking of trust, Grace said, "Did you hear about the support group?" She was referring to a unique program that had emerged in the wake of the Petrov case. Other spouses and partners who discovered similar betrayals had formed a network, helping each other heal while working to prevent others from falling victim to such schemes. Thomas occasionally spoke at their meetings, his experience providing both warning and hope. Boston Harbor, Grace reflected on the ripple effects of that single case. Petrov's organization was dismantled. Tori was facing the consequences of her choices, and countless lives had been changed, some destroyed, others rebuilt stronger than before. In her highest security cell in Danbury, Tori kept a small photo hidden from her early days in real estate. It showed her and Thomas at the opening of her first development, both smiling, both believing in their future. Sometimes, in the long hours of night, she looked at it and wondered when exactly she'd lost her way. When ambition had twisted into something darker, when success had become more important than humanity. Petrov, in his supermax cell in Florence, had no such moments of reflection. He'd simply moved on to plotting his next scheme, though his opportunities for manipulation were severely limited in the highly controlled environment. His empire was gone, his freedom forfeit, but his essential nature remained unchanged. Thomas, standing on his deck in Colorado, watched the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. His phone buzzed with a text from Grace. Another case, another opportunity to prevent someone else from going through what he had. He smiled, thinking about how endings truly weren't always what they seemed. Sometimes they were just the first step toward something better, something truer, something built on solid ground rather than shifting sand. The betrayal had nearly destroyed him, but in surviving it, in exposing it, he'd found a new purpose, protecting others from similar fates. As night fell over the country, from Boston to Colorado, from Connecticut to Florence, the players in this drama lived out their various sentences, some in cells, some in corner offices, some in mountain retreats. Each of them carried the lessons of the case in their own way, their lives forever altered by the choices they'd made and the truths they'd discovered. The story of Thomas and Tori Reeves, of Anton Petrov's empire and its fall, had become more than just a cautionary tale. It was a testament to the power of truth over deception, of justice over greed, and of the human capacity to rebuild from the ashes of betrayal. In his Denver office, Thomas kept a small plaque on his desk, a gift from Grace. It bore a simple inscription, "Through darkness to light." Each morning, as he reviewed cases of corporate fraud and financial deception, it reminded him that sometimes the deepest betrayals could lead to the most profound transformations. And so the story ended, not with a bang, but with the quiet satisfaction of justice served, lessons learned, and lives rebuilt. The players had taken their final positions, the conspirators in their cells, the investigators in their offices, and Thomas, no longer just a detective, but a protector of truth, in his mountain sanctuary, helping others navigate the shadows he knew all too well. It wasn't the ending any of them had expected, but perhaps it was the one they'd all earned, each in their own way. And in the end, That was all anyone could really ask for, the chance to learn from their choices, to grow from their experiences, and to find their way back to the light, no matter how dark the path might seem. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.